Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and welcome to my astrology channel. Now, we've got a lot to get in on this video because, as has happened a lot in 2020, a lot of astrological events have happened at the same time. So they all tend to come together and create a very intense atmosphere. What I'm going to spend most of my time talking about on this video is going to be Mars, because Mars is entering the sign of Aries on the 28th of June, and it's going to be there right through until the very early part of January in 2021. Now, normally Mars spends about 6 weeks in every sign, so we have a kind of short burst of time when Mars is very active and creating a lot of static in some ways, but also energizing projects and our lives in general. But for 6 months, that's a pretty long time. But before we get into Mars, we need to look at two very important things that are also happening in the current week. On the 30th, we have the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. Now, this is the second time this conjunction has occurred. It occurred on the 5th of April, so you might like to go back to that period of time. It was round about Easter, and think about the things that were happening in your life, because there's often an echo of those events when you have a repeat of an exact conjunction. And in fact, they are almost on exactly the same degree, so they really are pressing in on their original position. Now, I talk about Jupiter and Pluto quite a lot in my writings, and of course, I've got a whole video devoted to the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. But it is, in its simplest words, in the simplest way of understanding it, is it has a kind of boom-bust kind of aura about it. That's what you feel with a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. That's the experience it's mirroring. So we can look at that in terms of the economy. And of course, as we know, this year, the economy has been really affected by the coronavirus. It has crashed to the floor. It has struggled back again. It has crashed again. So we have seen that boom-bust effect really strongly. And we're going to see it particularly strongly at this current time as well. Jupiter and Pluto will conjoin again for the third and last time in November. And that's usually the most important time of all. And that comes in the wake of a very important full moon, which is, conjunct Uranus, and also, of course, round about the time of the American election. So that final Jupiter-Pluto conjunction is going to be, I was going to say a bozo, but it could be a bonanza. It depends really on your perspective. What I think we also see with Jupiter-Pluto, and you know how keen I am on keywords. So if we look at Jupiter and we think about expansion, growth, inflation, and we think about Pluto and we think about elimination, we think about transformation, and we put those two keywords together, which is why a lot of things go boom-bust and why a lot of things are eliminated from our lives under a conjunction like this. But of course, the purpose of that is just like pruning a tree, which I often think is some kind of something in the garden, because when we prune back severely, we get greater growth. And ultimately, that is what that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction is all about, both in global terms and in our personal experience. Now, we're also coming up to the final eclipse in the Cancer-Capricorn cycle. Now, I have spent, again, a whole video devoted to this, so I'm not going to go into it in great depth, but since we are so close to it, I think we need to refer to it. This actually happens in the very early hours of Sunday, the 5th of July. That's in universal time. So in fact, it happens on the 4th of July in the States, the further west you go. And I think this particular eclipse is incredibly important for America because its birthday, its Independence Day, is the 4th of July. And here we have a very important eclipse on the birthday. Now, what I also want to say about eclipses, this general theme, when we see a full moon in astrology, we always think of closure and completion, of endings, of conclusions. So we can bring something to an end, or we can reach a conclusion in the way of reaching an understanding. And we need to use these words well, because we can understand them on so many different levels. So when we've got a lunar eclipse, which is an eclipsed full moon, those ideas of closure and completion, of reaching a conclusion of some descriptions, they're kind of supercharged. We get them much more emphasized. And one of the things I like to do with astrology, and I spend a lot of time talking about on my audios in particular, is that if we work in harmony with the astrology, our lives tend to work better too. So always on a full moon, and certainly on an eclipsed full moon, what you want to do is close something down, end it, finish it, done and dusted. This can be an activity or an interest, but of course, sometimes what we need to close down are behaviors that are doing us no good. We could really do with getting rid of those and shutting them off. But sometimes we have no choice in the matter. And what happens is relationships end, jobs end, friendships end. We leave a place where we've lived for a long time. That's an ending. And sometimes we lose people because we move away and we don't see them anymore. So there's loss and endings in many ways. But that is what life in itself is all about. It is the great cycle of life, the great cycle of endings and beginnings, of consolation to desolation. And as always, when we're in at the very bottom of the cycle and we're feeling at our lowest and we seem to have lost so much, we're at that point where things are going to rise up again. And that, as I said, is the cycle of life. And it's certainly very relevant when we start to look at the cycle of eclipses. Now, just a moment ago, I talked about this being a very important eclipse for America. And I'm going to show you why this is important. I'm going to bring my screen up. And sometimes I have a lot of trouble doing this. But here I go. You can see it. So here is America's chart. And I want to say, while I'm looking at this chart, that there are several charts for the founding of America when it created or became independent. But this is the most favored one. This is the one most of us use. And I certainly enjoy using this chart and find it very relevant to America because I've looked at some of the most important events that have happened to America, and they really connect with or resonate with this chart. And 9/11 certainly did that. The Saturn-Pluto opposition that was present at that time was right on the axis of Sagittarius and Gemini here. And there have been many other things which I don't want to get into right now. But what I will say is there's another chart of interest that I know a lot of astrologers like to use as well. And that's one for July the 2nd at 4 in the afternoon, because it wasn't a set piece, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was actually all decided, the nuts and bolts of it all, by the 2nd of July. But not all the signatures were on the document, and that came sometime by the 4th of July. But the interesting thing about the 2nd of July chart at 4 in the afternoon is that it gives America a Scorpio rising chart. And one of the things that seems to resonate so well with the USA and Scorpio is the fact that Pluto now is the ruling planet of the USA chart. And the moon was in Capricorn, conjunct Pluto, exactly at the moment America declared or brought out its contract to say we've declared our independence. And as you'll see when I go on a little bit more about this chart, if we look at this Pluto here, Pluto at 27 degrees of Capricorn, we are really very near the Pluto return. Of course, this is the first Pluto return for the USA. It's never had one before. So it's going to be a very profound period of time from now, really right through to about 2022, 2023. It's a great process of transformation for the United States. And we can honestly see that as it's happening. We can see it politically, we can see it with the issue over racial equality and the reforms that are going on. Remember Saturn, Pluto and reform, I've talked about endlessly. And of course, we can see quite a lot of political struggle, really quite a divide between the right and the left. And all of this has a very Plutonic edge to it. So in these next 2 years, I think we'll see that America will completely reinvent itself. There are going to be so many, many changes. But if we come back to the present time and we look at this eclipse, which is coming up, the eclipse, the sun will be on the sun because it's happy birthday America, and the moon will be in Capricorn opposing it. And if you think of those words that I have used for a lunar eclipse and a full moon, the idea of closure and completion, of endings. And the other very interesting thing about full moons and certainly eclipses is they tend to bring simmering situations right up to boiling point. And this is going to be particularly interesting in America's case because we have two things really on the boil at the moment. One of them is the Black Lives Matter protest movement, which is massive, and so much change is potentially there, and there is a lot of political discussion and debate going on about this, which is hugely important. But also in America, we have the increase, the rate of increase of coronavirus is, well, I would say it's almost out of control now. And this will mark a very important stage of the coronavirus story for America. And I think we should look very carefully around this time and wait and see what decisions are made by the government, by Donald Trump, and quite how all this is managed. Because I think it will be evident that certainly some very new strategies and very firm direction has to take place because of the rampant and really completely under control coronavirus. And of course, as we'll see as well in the coming week, they haven't made their decision yet, the European Union, but almost certainly they are going to ban the American people from visiting Europe because of the situation with the coronavirus. And you can see this is all going to impact on the identity of America. When we think about the sun in astrology, it's the solar center of everything. It is the brand, the identity of the country, and it's going to have a really big effect on it. Anyway, I'm going to come back to me again and put this away. And I'm back in the room. And now I want to really get on with the idea of what this change of sign for Mars means. Now, as I said before, Mars usually moves through a sign, transits a sign in 6 weeks. It kind of zips through. And in 18 months, it does a complete tour of the whole zodiac. But this time, it's going to remain in the sign of Aries for 6 months, over 6 months. Now, Aries is its natural sign. Mars rules Aries. And it is a very dynamic sign. And Mars, of course, is a very dynamic planet. And when we think about Mars, we're sort of getting pure Mars. We're getting Mars on steroids. We're not getting any diluted Mars here. It's absolutely everything you ever wanted to have about Mars. So Mars is energy, it's dynamism, it's force, it's movement, it's power, it's conflict, it's confrontation. And we can see that theme is going to be very, very strong throughout these next 6 months. And we'll certainly see that globally. We're going to see a lot more kind of clashes between certain countries and some of the bubbling issues there now, whether it's with China and India, China with Hong Kong, whether it's Russia, whether it's Israel, whether it's Palestine, whether it's America with the European Union. It's all going to kick off with Mars in Aries. The other thing about having Mars in Aries is that it's in a cardinal sign. And when we think about cardinality, it's always very self-motivated. and it's always very highly motivated, and that goes for all the cardinal signs. So Mars, for the Arians, the Librans, the Capricornians, and the Cancerians, is going to be almost more dynamic, and certainly something that needs thinking about, almost more than perhaps for some of the other signs of the zodiac. But I'm going to go through all of those in a minute. And so when I think about Mars and Aries, I mean, if you know any Aries people, and I hate to mention this, but I'm also part of Team Aries, and we tend to be very straightforward, fiery kind of people. We're not good at subterfuge. We're hopeless at it. And why we really don't tell lies, because we can't remember what our lies were. We might as well just tell it how it is. And of course, Mars is the warrior of the planet, so we can be very feisty and very fearless. I prefer the word courageous. It sounds much nicer, but yeah, we can get into a lot of scraps with a lot of people. So when Mars is in Aries, for all us Arians, we're going to be super at it. We're going to have a lot of energy and drive. We're going to want to fulfill our ambitions, especially if we've been held up in these last 6 months because we've been in lockdown, or there have been other things that haven't enabled us to get things off the ground, or perhaps to feel that we've been able to really express ourselves. Remember, Mars in the first house, which is what we have with Mars in Aries, is very personal. It's about our personal life. It's about our personality and how we express it. As soon as I've gone through every sign, I'm going to talk about when Mars and when we need to notice the action of Mars and be a little prepared for it. But suffice to say, this is a very personal and driven period for Aries. If we go to the opposite sign and we look at Libra, we've got Mars in the 7th house. So we're in the area of collaboration. Well, not collaboration, partnership, really, one-on-one. So we're into the area of business relationships, working relationships, even family relationships, but also romantic relationships and relationships like marriage. Now, technically, Mars being in that sign means that other people aren't necessarily on the warpath, but they are certainly asserting themselves. And they may be asserting themselves in the way that they're coming looking for you. So you might be able to look at this in a very positive way and see that over these next 6 months, there's going to be a lot of interest in you, whether it's for what you do for a living, your talents, your professional abilities, or whether people are going to be hot on your trail because they're passionately in love with you. And sometimes, of course, Mars in this area does chivvy up your sex life, so things get a little bit more physical. Of course, the thing you have to be aware of is that you will also see your enemies here. This house is not called just the house of relationships, but it's also called the house of enemies, open enemies. So you'll know if you've made an enemy or where your enemies are, and you will certainly find that it's a very competitive period. And if you're ready to be a contender, you're ready to embrace competition, then you're going to do really, really well. It's far from a gentle, relaxed period in your love life. It's going to be really, really intense. If we look at the other two cardinal signs, we look at Capricorn and Cancer. For Capricorn, Mars is in the 4th house. So this is the area of home and family. It's the roots of life. So there could be an awful lot of energy spent on the home itself, whether you're going to be knocking walls down and painting and getting new furniture in, or whether it's more about the people within the family circle. So quite a lot of comings and goings, and maybe quite a lot of arguments too. And, we need arguments, and all families argue because sometimes we need to find a solution. We need to listen to everybody's opinion. What you have to be careful of here, Capricorn, with Mars in the 4th, is that any kind of arguments within the family don't become real divisions, and you don't end up, becoming really severely in conflict with any member of the family. I think, too, there's a drive to find the right home. So this is why there might be a lot of Capricorns moving home or finding homes. And it may also be quite a lot of activity in the home, meaning you're working from home or you're dealing a lot with family and children. if we look to the opposite side, we look to Cancer, we're looking at Mars in the 10th house. And the 10th house is all about ambitions. It's about life goals. It's about your career too. But I know sometimes from people who write into me, and they're retired people, they say to me, why are you always talking about career? Because we don't have a career anymore. So what does the 10th house mean for us? Well, you still have goals, and those goals can be very personal. They can be things that you want to do in the future, goals you have for your grandchildren, where you want to be, how you want to spend your days, what the content is, and the arrangements and the plans that you put in for your life. And so with Mars there's a terrific amount of energy spent building your future, which is a very, very positive way of looking at it. But also here we see there is potential conflict, particularly in the work situation, maybe with authority figures and employers. So it happens sometimes, you get into power struggles with people, and you are by nature not a sign that likes conflict, and you're certainly a sign that would rather cave in to save, any unnecessary, difficulty. But I think you probably have to stand up for your rights here, Cancer. It is important you don't get walked over. And if you are in a power struggle, sometimes a bully needs to be stood up to. And maybe that's the message that's echoing long and loud here. So it's a very active period for all Cancerians. And if you think about it, the way you might say, I'm building my future, whatever age you are, it's a very healthy way of looking at a Mars transit of your 10th house. Now, if we come to Taurus, for Taurus, Mars is in your preceding sign, so it's in the 12th house. It's preparing to come into your sign next January. It's got a long 6-month period in the underworld of the 12th house. This is, a very misunderstood area of the horoscope, but it's a very powerful area of the horoscope because it has a lot to do with things going on under the radar. So this means your Mars energy is under the radar. Maybe you're doing things that you don't want other people to know about. I suppose that could be anything from working on a plan that you want to bring to fruition later and say, look what I've been working on. You've been working on your memoir in the attic. Or it can mean that there are things going on in your life you'd really rather not other people knew about. So you're being very secretive. Well, it is what it is, and it's your choice as to how you use that Mars energy. Where I think it's very powerful is in the idea of seeding. I talk about this a lot and I love it. I love the idea of the 12th house being a seeding ground. It's where you seed ideas and plans for the future, and you plant them in the darkness. And during that time, Mars is in the 12th house. They'll be beavering away underground, ready to sprout as we get into 2021. So be patient with your endeavors and the things that take root in these next 6 months, because they will show their results in about 6 months' time and on from that point, but be patient. Now, for the opposite sign, and we're looking at Scorpio, we're looking at the 6th house. So when we think about the 6th house, we think about work and service. I also think about systems, and I say this often to you. We have a health system, our health system, mind, body, and spirit. And we also have the system by which our lives run. And we all should have a system. And in fact, organization and routine is an important part of providing security in our lives. We get up at a certain time, we have breakfast or we don't have breakfast, we go out to work or we don't go out to work, but whatever it is, the day has its form. And this is the 6th house matter. So getting that 6th house matter with Mars in there to run efficiently is very important. So there might be quite a lot of changes in terms of your daily life. There may be quite a lot of comings and goings, maybe a little bit staccato. You start a job and then you have to come home again. You're working half from home, you're working half in an office. So it isn't smooth and seamless. It's a bit jagged. And it may also mean there's a little conflict with workers, co-workers, and colleagues. Well, as long as that doesn't get out of control, and Scorpio, you can sometimes see, remember that old expression, reds under the beds? Sometimes that paranoia gets the worst of you and you think people don't like you or that they're working against you, well, don't let that happen while Mars is in the sixth house, because it will be very uncomfortable and it can cause a lot of problems with everybody in the workplace. But can you get a lot of work done? Yes, you can. Can you be super successful at work? Yes, you can. And if you're job hunting and you need a job, network like crazy, get out there, because there's jobs to be found for Scorpios with Mars in the sixth house. Now, if we look now, we turn our attentions to Aquarius. Aquarius, Mars is in the third house. And the third house is about communications. It's about education. It's about learning. And as I've said tirelessly on these videos in reference to third house matters, it's about finding your voice. It's about getting your voice out there. And there are just so many ways to do this. I mean, for instance, you could be part of an election, so you'd be getting your voice out there quite literally, standing on a soapbox, talking about your party. You could be in the neighborhood, dealing with neighborhood issues, and you are the spokesperson for that issue. So you're getting your voice out on behalf of the community. But you could also be getting your voice out because you've got a lot to say about certain things, certain skills, certain observations you may have. So maybe you're doing a lot of social media, maybe you're starting a blog, maybe you've got a website up and running. So you're reaching out to people with the idea of telling them something you believe they'll be better off for knowing. It's also about learning. So these next 6 months could be accelerated learning. You could be doing a real crash course in something. And I think certainly with the effects of the coronavirus, where we've had so many job losses, and there will be future job losses because companies will close, that story hasn't finished yet. So there is a real benefit in having extra skills to your name so that you can build a new career if necessary, or have something as an adjunct. The downside to Mars in this third house area is that you have a lot of arguments with people. I mean, it's good to have difference of opinions. And if one thing I can say about Aquarius, you're very opinionated. You know a lot about a lot of things and you believe you're right. And so there will be even more of a tendency to argue. But what you have to be careful of is not arguing with someone so that you end up with some kind of court, a day in court. You want to avoid any kind of potential for a legal outcome of an argument. So remember this as you get your horns locked with someone, it's not worth it. It's going to cost more than it's worth. So if we come to the opposite sign, if we come to Leo, Mars for Leo is in the ninth house. Now, normally I would be talking about ninth house and travel. I mean, this is the area of the horoscope. We go see the world. We take off and we go to the opposite side of the world. We see countries we've never seen before. We connect with people from different backgrounds and cultures, and it's a wonderful ninth house event. Well, there's not a lot of traveling going on. There's some now. We've broken through at the time I'm talking to you, which is, we're on sort of June the 27th. There's a little bit more air traffic going on, a little bit of more tentative travel. But, this isn't going to be something that's going to get better and better. I think there's going to be still a lot of problems with air travel. So I think this idea of Mars in the ninth, which is all about widening horizons, can probably be expressed a little bit more when we look in terms of the internet, so that we're reaching out, finding out more about other countries, other cultures, educating ourselves, learning about different things on an internet level, which can be extremely rewarding. And a little bit like Aquarius, your opposite sign, there is a great value in acquiring more skills to your name, getting more qualifications, especially academic qualifications, and doing things that will give you more of a platform in life after the coronavirus. So now we come to, we're nearly at the end. I have to check sometimes. I haven't done everything. So yes, I think Pisces and Virgo are my last signs. No, you know what? I'm about to forget Gemini and Sagittarius. I can't forget Gemini and Sagittarius. So let me think about Gemini for a minute. And we think about the 11th house, which is where Mars is going to be situated. This is a very creative area of the horoscope, but it's particularly good when we're thinking about entrepreneurialism. So this is where you get your entrepreneur's hat on and you start doing things that you can make money about, that you can bring people together for a particular purpose. You know, it's where we get together and do charity work. It's where we get on board with humanitarian interests. We get involved in protests and things that really help us make a statement, but we do it in groups. It's the group area of the horoscope. So a lot of energy expended here, and you probably will join protests and groups that want to make their presence felt. But I also think it's a great team area of teamwork, and even in a relationship, one-on-one. When you have Mars in the 11th house, you need to work as a team with your significant other, because when both of you are pulling on that yoke together, you'll get places. But Mars in the 11th, if you're at daggers drawn with each other, if there are too many arguments, you're pulling in different directions, you'll get nowhere. And that's really something to be aware of with Mars in the 11th. Consider you're a team, whether it's with your significant other, your best friend, whoever you've got working on a project, pull together and you'll be really, really successful. But let conflict set in, an argument, there could be some very, very nasty upsets, and maybe a project, an entrepreneurial project or a social project or something like that will end up in smoke. And also a protest could become pretty conflict ridden too. So, you know, gently, gently. Now, the opposite sign to that, this is Sagittarius, we're talking about Mars in the 5th house. And this is a very creative and procreative area. So maybe you're busy thinking, wouldn't it be nice to start a family? Wouldn't it be nice to have more to the family? So that procreativity is where Mars is sowing all its kind of intensity. So you'll get moving and motoring on adding or starting a family. But Mars, of course, in this creative area is also about getting your creative hat on. So many ways to do that. As I often say when I talk about creativeness, you can get creative with finance, you can get creative with the kitchen, in the kitchen, you can get creative with writing, with painting, with decorating, with any which way that you find your creative spirit expressing itself. It's your true self coming out in a creative enterprise. And when that happens, it is such a fulfilling thing. You're giving birth to your inner you, your inner entrepreneur or your inner artist or your inner financial genius, whatever it may be, your inner nurturer as well, because we think of this as the procreative center of the chart to do with babies and things like that. So that's where Mars is really headed. Where does Mars get to be a problem? You can have too much of a good thing. You will tend to go at something too hard and you'll risk burnout. And actually that's, with any of the signs of the zodiac, because the Mars energy is so pure and it will make you very driven and intense if it's, connecting with something in your horoscope. The minute you sense that burnout, brain heat, or bodily exhaustion, or your temper is getting frayed, stop, because Mars will lead to burnout. And I think Sagittarians have to be particularly careful about this. Just keep saying to yourself, you can have too much of a good thing. Romance is also in this area, and I'm going to say the same thing. It's great to have a lot of romance in your life. Lovely to have time to spend in a romantic way, and there will be some new romances for some Sagittarians, but you can have too much of a good thing. Come at things in moderation. So now I really am at my last two signs. I'm with Virgo and Pisces. And here we are with Virgo and Pisces. We're on the axis of finances. So if we look at Pisces first, Mars is in your next door neighbor sign of Aries. As I speak, it's sort of coming out of Pisces, where it's been for about 6 weeks. And you may have found this quite a stressful 6 weeks because there's been a lot going on. And it might have really driven you to the edge a bit. But on the other hand, maybe that idea of getting a lot of things done has been a good thing too. We now put Mars in Aries in the second house, and this is all about money and self-esteem. So on the one hand, you can make a lot of money with Mars in the second house, and you can expend a lot of energy making money. But hello, what else can happen? Yes, you're there before me. A lot of arguments over money can come about. The thing to do about this, whether you're trying to negotiate a salary structure with an employer or something, is to come at it, without feeling fearful. Always say, can we discuss finances? And if they don't want to discuss finances and they don't want to give you a raise or anything, you can say, look, let me tell you how it is for me. And so you come at it as a negotiation. If you come at financial discussions and financial matters as a negotiation, you're going to come out on the top end of that. And of course, there can be arguments over money for all sorts of reasons. If you're in a partnership, one partner may want to spend money on this, or another partner on that. And perhaps there are arguments over money simply because money is an issue. But let's try to focus on making money. And I think, Pisces, you're a very you're into diversification. You're a very adaptable, versatile sign. You just think of new ways to make money or to make your money go further. So finally, we come to Virgo, who's also on this financial axis. Mars is in a financial house. For you, it's in the 8th house. So we're looking here at other people's money. This is the money you have that you share with other people. Now, this can mean the monetary arrangements you have with lending institutions like mortgage holders, banks, credit card companies. We can also look at it in terms of business partnerships. If you have a business, you share those financial interests with your partners. And of course, it can mean your partners per se, people, your life partners. You have financial interests that you share. So Mars says there's a lot of energy expended doing this together, making more money together, dealing with financial matters to get them working better. That's the real purpose of Mars in the 8th. But of course, same with your opposite sign, arguments over money, conflict over money. And I think particularly in regard to any of you who are coming out of relationships, maybe you've decided it's all over, bar the shouting, or because the shouting's all over too. So now you have to sort the finances of the piece out. It could get acrimonious. Do your best not to let it get acrimonious. Remember what I said to Pisces was make it a negotiation. Come at that discussion as a negotiation, not as a set piece. And of course, there could be arguments over redundancy settlements. There could be arguments over inheritances and wills. So this, particularly in the Virgo camp, you need to be aware of. In a way too, and when I teach, I talk about each house being an extension of the one before it. So we look at the 7th house being about relationships, love relationships. And we see, what do we get from a love relationship? Well, hopefully we get lots of beautiful sex. So Mars in the 8th house can encourage that as well. So it gets a lot more physical in a good way. But of course, if there's anything wrong with that side of a relationship, it's going to cause more conflict than ever. Remember, what you want to do here is negotiate, find a way through. And one last thing that I didn't say enough really on Pisces is about self-esteem, the relationship between money and self-worth. Sometimes we don't get paid enough and we feel very unfairly treated. And that's what happens when you don't get enough money and people don't treat you as you deserve. So it really is strengthening this sense of, I'm very much worth my salary. I'm very much worth my particular gifts, myself, me, who I am. I am worth better and more than this. And it's that thought behind financial negotiations and financial matters that really matters too. So there we are. I've gone around all 12 signs, and I think you've probably got quite a good idea about how Mars will be affecting you during the course of these next 6 months, putting it to good use as well as perhaps understanding. And there's always a downside to everything in astrology. And I think I've painted that picture of the confrontational side of Mars, which can be very uncomfortable. So there are some dates that I want to give you here. A lot of them are in those written forecasts that I've done, the 6-month forecast. You'll find them in there, especially if I've written about Mars in your particular forecast. I've put them all there. Here are the dates that you'll need to be aware Mars is a particularly strong force, and to take things carefully, to remember that it will be easy for things to turn pear-shaped in an instant because of differences of opinion and maybe things not going quite as well as you would like them to go. So we're looking at the early part of August. We're looking at that first 7 to 9 days of August. Mars is a very strong character at this particular point. So you'll need to watch all sorts of Mars things that I've talked about in your signs. 13th of August, middle of August, Mars square Pluto. Very confrontational in terms of global matters. You may see all sorts of sparks flying between divisions in parliaments and governments, as well as we might see that happening country against country. And the 24th of August, around this time, things may seem relentlessly hard and the news may not be terribly good. Certainly in and around those dates, don't take on anyone bigger and better than you. You know, discretion is going to be the better part of valor. Mars turns retrograde on the 9th of September, so things to do with Mars while it's stationary are going to be super big. So again, a time where there does seem to be a lot of stress. You know, you'll feel stressed out. The world will seem stressed out. And it's just, you know, sometimes just knowing, oh, I see Mars is stationary retrograde. It helps you get a handle on it. And it's surprisingly much easier when you know what's going on. Here we come to the end of September, the final days, the final few days, Mars square Saturn and Saturn turning stationary direct. So we're looking at that period from about the 25th to the 30th of September. Again, there might be a lot of hard facts to embrace at this time. Maybe there's more restrictions coming around, whether that is, you know, general terms in terms of looking at it the coronavirus wise, or maybe it's that we feel the chains are at their heaviest around us, and you know that can be a very debilitating thing. We're constantly looking at that glass and seeing it half empty, and that's a little bit like what it's like when Mars is angling Saturn towards the end of September. 9th of October, another big and important day. If possible, don't choose that day to have a meeting of importance, because people will be very divided on that day. Far better to leave it 4 days after that rather than before it, and maybe then you'll find it easier to come to a good decision. It's a bit of a difficult passage, that mid-October period. We also come to November, and I think I mentioned the idea of the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction happening 3 times. And on November the 12th, it comes back for its 3rd and final time. So that is a really important moment for the global economy, important moment for the coronavirus. It's an important moment for all of us in some part of our lives. And at that particular time, Mars will also be stationary, about to turn direct. So there's so much information coming into the forum at that time. We're going to be bombarded with stuff going on. It's just after the American election. That's if it happens. I mean, who knows what may happen between now and the American general election, because my goodness, we're going to, hair is going to be standing on end with all the developments that will happen between now and November. But it is around that time, and fortunes will change around that period of time. Finally, can Mars and Pluto stay away for Christmas? No, they are part of our Christmas celebrations. We have them at the Christmas table. So it means, particularly at Christmas, forgive and forget. If somebody gives you a horrible gift, put a great big smiley face on it and say, oh, I can use this tin opener. I've always wanted a tin opener like this. And I have to tell you, that did happen to me one Christmas. Somebody bought me a tin opener. put a good face on it. And also, you know, so often at Christmas, we want everything to be wonderful, and it so often isn't. And certainly, if we're separated from loved ones and we've got all sorts of financial problems and restrictions, it can be the worst time in the world because we want it to be so special. So remember, there is that Mars-Pluto aspect, and not to make too much of everything. You know, things that happen in one day in a newspaper, for instance, we have a way of saying, you know, today's newspaper is tomorrow's fish and chip paper. And I think if you can have that attitude to things, so much healthier. Because yes, what happened last week even is last week's story. We are on with this week, we are moving forward. Now, it doesn't mean we don't care about what happened, but it means we can't hang on to bad stuff. We can't hang on to bad feelings because it destroys us and it destroys everyone else. We have to look to the future. Remember, as I began this to you, I was talking about endings and beginnings, the great cycle of consolation and desolation. Well, let's look at that peak at the bottom, climbing up to consolation again, always looking at that time. So I've given you a nice run through on Mars and a whole lot of other things as well, which I hope you'll find very beneficial and useful. And I'll say goodbye, take care, and I'll speak to you again in a couple of weeks. Bye for now.